Hey, welcome NASCAR fans. I'm Charlie Turner. We're here this week for our race rewind for the Oral-B, what was it, American 500? Uh,
Uh,
right-
let's just call it the Dixie 500.
the Dixie 500, I'm good with that. The Dixie 500 at Atlanta Motor Speedway Sunday night, won by, surprisingly, a little bit, I think, by Casey Kane. And good race. So we're going to talk about it here a little bit for the next 15, 20 minutes or so. Again, I'm Charlie Turner. I'm joined by my partner in crime, Dan Beaver. How are you, Dan?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good, man. I enjoyed that race. That's we don't get a lot of 500-mile races on mile-and-a-half tracks anymore, which is a good thing, I think, in general. But it's when you do get one, it's kind of a special occasion. I do think it does make it a bit different. And this race this past week was like 3 hours of Kevin Harvick, and then Casey Kane jumped up.
Yeah, I think they could have started it maybe a little bit earlier, but I had no problem with the overall length of the race.
Yeah, I don't get that at all. Why they don't start the thing at like 5 o'clock or something that would seem to make sense to me.
Because the rest of the world gets Monday off. I don't. So it just screws up my deadlines.
But you need to send in a letter.
Yeah.
You're tight with Bruton. Fix that thing up.
Yeah, so far, NASCAR hasn't really accommodated me on schedule requests. So
Well, there's always a first time. So anyway, we had some interesting storylines this past week. Of course, this was the penultimate race leading into the chase. There's one more chase qualifying race at Richmond next week. This one was a big deal. There were a number of drivers who just needed to win to get into the chase by winning this race. One of them actually did. Casey Kane pulled it off. And I don't know. Did you get one of those NASCAR deja vu feelings there at the end when Harvick all of a sudden couldn't reel in Kane after he'd been driving away from everybody for about 350 miles all night?
yeah, and you didn't know that it was coming, but you weren't surprised that it came. It's just so hard to put 100% race together. You can get 95%. You just have to make sure that at least 5% of that's the.
At the end.
If you screw up for 5%, it happens before those final laps.
Yeah, it was. Harvick had not just in this race, but also had a dominating race Saturday night in the Nationwide Series race where he led almost every lap in that race, and looked like he was going to do the same thing here in the Cup race on Sunday night. Just fast. I mean, he would get out in front in that clean air and just drive away from people almost a half a lap. I thought he was going to lap the field at one point if they hadn't gotten a couple of cautions. But then at the end, in the last 100 laps, we did start to get cautions and restarts, and that's when things seemed to start to change a bit.
Yeah, and it's kind of that same old story where Stewart-Haas is concerned. Mistakes. Had a little bit of a discussion as to whether or not this really counted as a mistake for Harvick or if someone else caused his problems, but trying to drive through Paul Menard on that first green-white checkered attempt rather than cooling his heels for just a little bit and trying to go around him, I think is what cost him the race. Logano ultimately getting up to his right-hand side and making just putting too many cars in too small a space is ultimately what put him in the wall. But Harvick still had a good finish in his control. The fact that he was willing to wreck in order to get around Menard is just because
That's the chase. It's the chase format. The only thing he's got going at this point is to win a race.
Yeah, he had nothing to. He didn't care if he finished 18th, 19th.
Yeah.
His fans might, and in my bailiwick, fantasy players certainly did. But the only thing that matters for last week and the last few weeks has been winning. Unless you're Matt Kenseth, and I think that was the difference between what happened in those final few laps. Matt Kenseth didn't have to win. Casey Kane did. So Kane wanted just a little bit more than Kenseth did, and Kane got it.
Yeah, interesting storyline, that chase storyline. But also, let's stay on Stewart-Haas for a minute because that was I think probably the other big story of the weekend was the fact that Kevin Harvick had a dominant weekend in his car. Danica Patrick had her best finish ever in a Cup race. In fact, on the final restart, green white checker, she started from the third position, went backwards from there. But that happens to a lot of drivers. I thought she ran a really good race. Kurt Busch was strong all night, stayed out of trouble for the most part. And then you had the return of Tony Stewart, and Stewart's car was strong for a good portion of the night till he hit the wall, and I can't remember, was it Biffle that got into him? Somebody got into him, put him in the wall, and that was
Kyle Busch.
Kyle Busch. Oh, well, of course, Kyle Busch. Yeah. So, but the Stewart-Haas guys all looked stout, including the gal looked stout.
They did, and for Tony Stewart, the media did what Tony Stewart needed the media to do, and you got to kind of applaud them for that. They left him alone. You didn't hear from him all weekend except for his prepared statement. I suspect that NASCAR had something to do with that as well.
I'm sure they did.
Respected his privacy, and eventually they're going to have to distract him with questions with painful questions, but allowing him to get back in the car and concentrate just made the difference for that team. They had great practices, qualified well, and that's not what we expected from a driver coming out of those circumstances and a 3-week hiatus. It also speaks, obviously, to Tony Stewart's innate skills as a race car driver, but I don't know that he would have had that result if he had been hounded the way that he would be hounded in other sports or other series under the same circumstances.
No, you're probably right. Although he does have has a very good track record at Atlanta Motor Speedway, I'm sure that team has really good notes there. It was pretty obvious that their setups all across the 4-car team were good. They were strong, so that helped. And I think you're right. I think it was a good reintroduction back into the series. Not a real big deal was made of the fact that they waived or altered the chase qualifying requirements to allow Stewart to get in if he does win, either if he had won at Atlanta or wins this week at Richmond. Nobody seems to be saying much about that. So good stuff there. As you also alluded to, let's go to a different team. Now, Matt Kenseth had a good, strong finish, ran up front most of the night, finished well enough to qualify for the chase on points. So now he can go all out for a win at Richmond this week if he chooses to do that. But he wasn't the only Gibbs car that had a good weekend. I thought it was notable that Denny Hamlin led as many laps as he did and was as strong as he was in kind of the middle, middle third of the race without his crew or car chief. Hamlin did a good job.
He did, and Hamlin, I think, has finally put some of those problems behind him. He's come on very strong recently. If not for the crash at Bristol, he'd have a really nice top 10 streak going. Get the exact number here. But oops, I will if I can type anyway. Reaching over everything. If not for the problem at Bristol, he'd have a 6-7 race top 10 streak going on oval tracks. So I think we can say that his early season problems are well behind him. And of course, we have to note that he was leading at Bristol when he got taken out there. So that team's made a turnaround and just in time to start the chase, especially since there are 3 flat tracks in the chase.
Yeah, everybody but Kyle Busch in that team at this point. Kyle's not his streak of, I don't know what you call him, recklessness continues.
Yeah, and I'm sitting here working on a story for Roto World about the chase chances, handicaps, and Kyle Busch. This is the wrong time to lose momentum.
Right.
He's never been a consistent driver. That's one reason that he hasn't won a championship, and I don't think he would win a championship under NASCAR's old format, either of them. I don't think he can put 10 perfect races together, and he certainly can't put a perfect season together. But this could play into his favor if he can just get 3 strong races in a row. He could keep advancing. If he just, I think for Kyle Busch, he just needs to advance just a little bit at a time. But first, he's got to stop hitting the wall and other cars, and right. I don't know when that's going to happen.
Well, it does. It certainly didn't happen this week. Let's okay. Joe Gibbs Racing. We'll go to Penske Racing. Another strong run for both Brad Keselowski and Joey Logano. I thought Logano was going to win that race the last 50 laps or so. It looked to me like he was just coming on enough to where he could get up there, but couldn't pull it off.
He wasn't going to have anything for Harvick, but you're right. He did look really good there at the very end. During that final, right before the lap 299 caution, he was keeping Harvick in sight, and if he had a good pit stop, who knows what could have happened.
Well, that's kind of what I was thinking. Maybe if it got to the point where another pit stop, that gives Harvick's team a chance to screw up and Joey's a chance to do it perfect, and that might be the pass, but didn't happen.
But then we've got the same story for Logano as we had for Harvick. There was very little to lose by putting his car in a dangerous position, right. Trying to go to the outside of Harvick while Harvick was messing around with Menard, and he ends up finishing outside the top 10. But it's not indicative of how well he ran. Brad Keselowski, if it hadn't been for whatever that stack up was, kind of a weird stack up getting into the pits.
Yeah, it was very weird.
He was looking good too, so. And he's the one that brought out that caution, that lap 299 caution.
Okay,
and he and Josh Wise and didn't happen.
Yeah, we can kind of wind. We talk about maybe some of the back markers, but before we do that, we need to say something about Hendrick Motorsports. Casey Kane with the win puts all four of Hendrick's cars in the chase. We were kind of been waiting for this to happen for the last, I think, 3 or 4 weeks. I think both of you and I expected something to happen good. It didn't really look to me like it was going to happen Sunday night in this race. I mean, Casey was, top 15 most of the first 2/3 of the race, but didn't really look to me like he had much until whatever pit stop that was. He came out of there, they shot some nitrous in that thing, and all of a sudden it just took off.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was that lap 299 caution. He came out in third, so he was in a better position by being on the inside of the front row. But it's notable that he restarted third on both the 299 caution that took him up to the end of the scheduled distance, and on the lap 330, the second green-white checker attempt, he started in third again. And in doing so, he had to pass two strong drivers both times. It was Hamlin and Harvick on the first restart, and Kenseth and Hamlin on the second restart. So that was sheer willpower. But you're right, he didn't put together a complete race. He hasn't all year. So you got to wonder about his chase hopes now that he's in it. But at least Hendrick Motorsports has got the bragging rights of having their entire organization in it. And Kane's a nice guy, and it's good that he's there. He'll probably advance into the second round. But I don't think all the problems are fixed in the number 5 team.
Now, it'll be interesting once we get past Richmond next week. We won't probably talk about it until after that race, but to pick the 4 drivers who are going to eliminate, or 3, or I guess it'd be 4, are going to eliminate themselves in that first round of the chase, because I think it might come out to be fairly obvious.
Yeah.
Anyway, any other notable accomplishments this race, other than Danica finishing, what, 7th, 6th or 7th, I think?
6th, and I think that certainly is worth noting.
Yeah.
She fell back 2 positions on that final restart, but she was also on the outside line, so the fact that she only fell back 2 positions, I think, is notable. That it speaks well. She certainly seems to have a knack for the similarly configured mile-and-a-half tracks now, because her previous best was Kansas with that 7th. So I think she's coming along. I've been a fan of hers for a while, not simply because I'm a Danica Patrick fan, but I like the idea of women competing at this level, and would like to see more of it. And I think she's good for the sport in that regard. I think another you've got to call out Jimmy Johnson as well. He seems to have put his troubles behind him. He now has back-to-back top 5s and 3 consecutive top 10s. So whatever they were doing, they stopped experimenting early enough to gain a little bit of momentum. Be interesting to see what they do at Richmond.
It almost looked to me like they had a car that could have contended for the win, but they didn't want to get in Casey Kane's way. I don't know if this is the NASCAR conspiracy theorist in me jumping up, because every once in a while it does. I'm sitting here thinking, what are the two biggest positives that could come out of this race for NASCAR? One would be Tony Stewart winning it, which I actually called when I was sitting there starting to watch the race at the beginning with some friends. And the other would be Casey Kane making it and putting that fourth Hendrick car in. So we got one of those results.
Yeah, I don't know that Johnson really was capable of winning it. I think he was capable of running in the top 5, and he didn't look dominant at any stage. I think a couple of drivers.
No, he looked relentless, which is Jimmy Johnson like. Just was steadily moving up the field, and it's like, okay, this looks familiar. I've seen this a few times.
But I think he and a couple of other drivers really benefited by a couple of those pit stop sequences when they could go just a little bit further, and we had, I think, 3 green flag, the beginnings of 3 green flag segments, pit stop segments that were interrupted by cautions. And I don't think Danica would have been where she was if it hadn't been for that. I don't think Biffle would have been where he was if it weren't for that at the end after he got his lap back and NASCAR's no driver left behind policy. And I'm not sure. And I'm not sure that Johnson would have been nearly in the same position he was. So I think it was fortuitous for a few drivers and unfortunate for a few.
There you go. Okay, any final thoughts before we close out this one and get ready for Richmond next week?
I think Gordon needs to be mentioned briefly. The fact that he ran so well after hitting the wall, and the fact that he cut that left front tire. Now that Johnson has stopped experimenting, you got to wonder if the 24 team's experimenting kind of late, and if that's going to end up biting them before it's all said and done. I think Johnson and Chad Knaus experimented at the right time. And if that's what was going on to cause Gordon to cut his left front tire and pound the wall, then timing could be called into question.
And next week at Richmond will be interesting to watch for that, because still guys are they want the win for the bonus points. You've got drivers that are going to be doing anything they can just to get into the chase, so they're going to see some bonsai runs and some wild Hail Mary type pit calls. But you've also got this being a flat track, and with 3 flat tracks in the chase, an opportunity to experiment and try some things this week for teams that are confident that they don't maybe need the bonus points more than they need to figure something out for, pick the track, Phoenix, New Hampshire, wherever. I mean, and Martinsville. I mean, those are the 3 flat ones.
Yeah, you really only have 3 drivers, maybe 2 drivers who aren't going to go insane. That would be Biffle and maybe Boyer and Larson. Boyer and Larson have to stay close enough that they could strike if something happens to Biffle. But so long as Biffle and Newman run conservative races, get top 15, top 20 finishes, they should be safe. Yeah. So those guys are about the only ones you can count on not to do something foolish. The rest of the field is going to lose their minds.
There you go. It'll be fun to watch. I'm really looking forward to this week's race because of that. I think NASCAR might have actually hit on something with this format for the chase. At least it looks like it so far. We'll be talking about that race. We'll preview it on Dan Beaver's NASCAR Fantasy Pit Stop on Thursday this week. So come back and watch us there. We'll be doing On Pit Row here in a little bit, our live hangout there, where we get Steve Ronkowitz and Beth Ann Heisler involved in this whole deal. We'll talk about more of these things that happen this week. I think there's some other stories probably to talk about too. But this has been our On Pit Row NASCAR Race Rewind for the Atlanta race. I'm Charlie Turner, that being the Dixie 500, as Dan likes to call it. I'm Charlie Turner. You can follow me on Twitter at On Pit Row. Dan Beaver, follow at Fantasy Race. Read his Yahoo Fantasy Sports Fantasy Racing preview this week on yahoosports.com, and the article that he alluded to on rotoworld.com that's also coming out soon. So we'll talk to you all soon. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back again next week to talk about the recap this Richmond race and maybe get into a little bit of the chase stuff as we go. So thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
All right.